Heaven is in my heart. Part 3, a story from Genesis to Revelation. Chapter 5, God chooses Abraham. Abraham was a descendant of Noah's son Shem. Abraham's father Terah lived and died in Ur, which is in Mesopotamia or modern-day Iraq. Terah had 3 sons, Abram, Haran, and Nahor. Haran died very young, but he had a son named Lot. Abram married Sarah, but they were childless for many years. Abram moved from Ur to Haran. While in Haran, God made another covenant with Abram. God gave him a new name, Abraham, and he promised Abraham descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, even though by now Abraham was 75 years old. God also asked him to move from Haran to Canaan. Abraham trusted God's promise and moved to Canaan along with Sarah. Yet even after several years, Sarah was still childless. So she took matters into her own hands and asked Abraham to have a child with the Egyptian slave girl Hagar. The child was named Ishmael. Later in the book of Genesis, it is written that the Ishmaelites bought Joseph from his brothers and sold him to the Egyptians. Abraham saved his nephew twice from destruction. The first time he saved him from 4 kings and their armies when they attacked the city of Sodom and took Lot and his family into slavery. Abraham fought against the king's armies, defeated them, and rescued Lot's family. On his way back, he was met by Melchizedek, the king of Salem, who brought forth bread and wine and shared them with Abraham. Genesis chapter 14, verse 18 to 20. Melchizedek was a prefigurement of Jesus and the priesthood of Jesus in the New Testament. The second time Abraham saved Lot and his family was right before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah by fire and sulfur because they had become very wicked. Lot's wife was not spared because she disobeyed and looked back out of curiosity to see the plight of Sodom and Gomorrah. There is a recurring theme in both the story of Noah and the flood and destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah that the consequence of distrust, sin, and disobedience is death. Eventually, when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90 years old, the first of their descendants was born, and they named him Isaac. God made another covenant with Abraham and promised him a kingdom, a promise which would later be fulfilled by David. The covenant was marked by the circumcision of Isaac, and from that time on, all male born would be circumcised in remembrance of God's promise. When Isaac was a young boy, God put Abraham to a test. God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, his only son, who was born to him and Sarah in their old age, and through whom the descendants as numerous as the stars were to come. It was an extreme test of his faith and his trust in God. It is quite astonishing to see Abraham's strong faith and complete trust in God that he did not spare his only son. At the moment when Abraham was going to strike his son dead as a sacrifice to God, God sent an angel to intervene and stop him by providing a ram for the sacrifice. A ram and not a lamb, because the Lamb of God would be provided in the incarnation, life, passion, death, and resurrection of God's only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. Isaac later on goes on to father descendants as numerous as the stars. The events of the Old Testament were a slow and deliberate preparation for the coming of Jesus. God kept his promise, and it was fulfilled hundreds of years later when Moses led the descendants of Abraham from Egypt back to the land of Canaan. This also symbolizes the redemptive journey of man from the slavery of sin back to the promised land or heaven.